With Daya. So we have very two special guests. They're going to shed light on an important and a very sensitive topic. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we're excited to have Mansi Bakshi, a client advocate at Daya, and dear Tisha Beatty, the Director of Outreach and Prevention at Daya. Join in here. So let's get started. What is Domestic Violence Awareness Month and why is it important?
Hello, hello. Yes, thank you so much for the question, and thank you to all the listeners tuning in. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and really it is a month when the entire sort of United States, but the entire world actually gets together.
Oh.
And in solidarity for all survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, and folks just raise awareness during this month like we are today.
Yeah.
Especially organizations like Daya, this month we focus on shedding light on the different forms of abuse and how abuse is seen in our South Asian culture,
Right.
and minority cultures in general as well. And we just raise awareness and we make sure that everybody knows what resources exist for them and how they can get help, give help, and at the end of the day, be safe.
Oh wow. I mean, and I didn't know this is throughout the world, so that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's. I think it's just like,
you know,
in a way, like Pride when the whole
Yeah,
world gathers
yeah,
together.
yeah.
It is in the same
Same
way
way.
that we're just showing solidarity to the survivors.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Can you please provide us an overview of the different forms of domestic violence?
Yeah, so it's okay. So Layla, when I first started in this entire movement, I wasn't even aware that there were so many different forms of domestic violence because,
Right.
truth be told, what we see in the media is often the physical aspects, right?
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
broken bones, the bruised
Yeah.
eyes. But there's so much more than that. There's verbal, psychological, emotional abuse where someone's reality of their existence is sort of questioned and they're being gaslit into thinking that they're the reason behind domestic violence. They're being verbally abused on a daily basis where I always like to give this example. If you wake up every morning and you look at yourself in the mirror and you say you are not worthy, at some point you're going to start believing that,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So that's what emotional, psychological, and verbal abuse sort of do to a survivor. But then there is spiritual abuse, which is honestly very commonly seen in the South Asian
I've never
diaspora.
heard of it.
Yeah, so glad we could talk about it today, because spiritual abuse is very commonly seen, and it is when an abuser is using either religion to justify their form of abuse, or not allowing the survivor to practice the religion that they would like.
Oh,
And so, more commonly, it's seen that the perpetrator, the abuser, is saying, in the holy book, whichever holy book that you're referring
Yeah.
to, it may say like a very vague line, as in, like, oh, a man should be the head of the household, right?
Yeah.
But then what abusers do is they use that exact verse or portion of the religious text to say, look, it says that the man should be the head of the household, so a man can do whatever, and what I'm doing to you is actually justified within the holy text as well.
Wow.
So that's spiritual abuse, but there is, financial abuse, which is seen in 98% of domestic violence survivors as well. That is when a survivor does not have access to their own funds, or they're either being given an allowance to use on a monthly basis, or they're working full time, but their family is like, the in-laws are taking money, from them. They're saying, oh, let's put it in one fund at home, and whenever you need something, ask us. So when a survivor is trying to flee, how do they escape? So those are some very common types of forms of abuse that we see in our
And then you think like the financial, just because the way Asians are raised, especially Indians, like that's just normal, right? You think, okay, in-laws are head of the family, so yeah, they should have my money. Like, why not? And I didn't realize that could be a form. Not all cases might be abuse, but that could be right?
Absolutely.
So,
And it just makes the process of seeking help just
so
more
much
difficult,
harder.
because if every single one of your credit card transactions is being monitored, then like
Yes.
how do you go get a hotel room for you
Yeah.
and your children? How do
Right.
you purchase supplies to go on a, like
Yeah.
escape by
Right.
car?
Yes.
So overall, just a lot of different types of violence that get put into this umbrella term,
Yeah.
which is domestic
Yeah.
violence.
Okay. What are the warning signs of domestic violence, and how can people recognize them?
So, with warning signs, it can oftentimes take time to appear in a new relationship.
Okay.
A lot of the love bombing and things that, your partner might do initially, you take it as love.
Yeah.
And especially if, you've never experienced those things before.
Mhm.
But over time, you'll start to see that power and control dynamic change.
Yeah.
And it starts to impede almost every aspect of your life. You might notice that, your partner is insulting you or being condescending or making jokes. That's very common in our community, where you might be in a big group
Yeah.
setting and or party
Yeah.
setting, and your
Yeah.
husband is kind of making jokes about you in front of everybody.
Yeah.
And it's just about over time how it lowers your self-esteem and your confidence,
Yeah.
and you start to believe how your abuser is treating you over time.
Mhm.
Another thing is like noticing that there's a lot of jealousy, or that you're starting to get isolated by your partner. You're no longer allowed to see your friends or your family. They may not want you to work, or they may say, oh, take care of the kids at home, I'm making enough.
Yeah.
So, don't finish your college degree.
Yeah.
And over
Yeah.
time, it isolates you, and it stops making you think that you have the self-worth to flee when you need to flee, or if you want to
Yeah.
flee. And especially in our community, when we're raised to, or not self-respect, respect for your elders and your
Elders,
family
yeah.
is so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
It just kind of takes you down this path where it's hard to get out sometimes, or even recognize that it's happening.
Yeah.
So as a friend, I feel like a warning sign might be that, when your friend talks to you, you start to notice that they're saying small things like, oh, well, he doesn't like it when I do this, or he doesn't like it when I say this. And it's hard sometimes as a friend to also intervene, because you want to know that you're there for your friend as as a support system, but you also don't want to cause more problems.
Right.
So it's very complicated.
Yeah. There's that fine line.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I was just thinking, I had seen a recent episode of Made in Heaven. The second episode, where that she's an actress, and that the husband, or to be husband, doesn't want her to be acting anymore, and he buys her a house out of town or something, right? So like that is a form of isolation. And then they show that he was abusing her because she was trying to cover up everything for her wedding outfit.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was so sad, because the family had no idea. And once they found out, the family is like, no, you don't need to get married. And somehow he still convinced her to get married to him. So like, I know we've spoken about this before, that it takes like how many tries for an abusee to get out of the relationship?
7 to 9
Yeah.
tries.
So I think that is sad too, because as a friend, you could feel and you could tell and think she's not listening or he's not listening, but it's just a different dynamic there.
Yeah, I find that sometimes it's, as a friend or an outsider or a family member who's supporting someone, it's important to remind yourself that you can't get frustrated, if your friend does try to flee.
Yes.
You just have to be patient. And I feel like it's better for them to know that you're there for them regardless of the situation, whether they decide to stay in the relationship or not, and not judge them.
Yeah.
Because judgment is one of the biggest reasons why somebody will stop sharing information with you as well.
Yes.
So just, making that person know that you're there, and when they are ready to leave, you are there to support them. But just, trying to be non-judgmental as well.
And being there. Okay. How prevalent is domestic violence, and is it a global issue?
Absolutely. I wish that we had a task force, like, how the entire world for COVID shut down and did something about it, right? I wish that people would do that for domestic violence as well. it is a pandemic. 1 in 4 men, and actually, globally, 1 in 10 men and 1 in 4 women will experience some form of intimate partner violence in their lifetimes, and those are reported numbers, right?
Really?
We're not
That's
we're
high.
not
Yeah.
figuring out whether in rural places
Yeah.
what the prevalence is,
happening,
right?
yeah.
And so I always like to emphasize that these statistics come from reported,
Yeah.
instances
Yeah.
and cases. Um,
So
and
the
so
numbers could be way higher because
absolutely,
not everything gets reported. A lot
and in
gets under.
a lot of the world, especially for men, right?
Yeah.
Domestic violence isn't even seen as a male issue in
no.
any way.
Yeah.
So when I see the number that only 1 in 10 men face
Yeah.
DV, I often question it, because I know that in India, for example, where I'm from,
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of men would speak up if they're facing any type of abuse, because they haven't been taught that, hey, this and this
Yes.
counts as psychological abuse or domestic violence, whatever it may be. And even for women back, in South Asia, domestic violence is an issue that is kept behind closed doors and as a family matter. And a lot of people don't even want to speak up about it to their friends. And if they do speak up to their friends about it, friends oftentimes in the South Asian culture will say, oh, this is a normal part of marriage or a relationship. Try to figure it out.
Have a baby.
Have a baby.
Yeah.
It'll fix everything. or involve the parents. They'll have like a counseling session, but usually things get worse after that, like mediation
Yes.
starts
Yeah.
off. Most often the abuser, the perpetrator, gets angry because why are you telling people about what I'm doing?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And so absolutely, TV is a global issue, and I think we need a task force to do something about this.
Oh man, I had no idea that it was such a big issue, and I'm just thinking if it's 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men, then like the number is definitely higher. Like you said, rural areas they're not reporting this, and especially in India, like who's gonna listen?
Absolutely.
So yeah. What are the psychological and emotional impacts of domestic violence on survivors?
So I was actually thinking about the show that you mentioned, Made in
Yeah.
Heaven, and the situation
Yeah.
where she eventually decided to stay,
Yeah.
even though the family was saying,
Yeah.
don't get married to
Right,
this
yeah.
person. And that's the thing specifically with psychological and emotional, um, forms of abuse, is you start to believe what tactics or things that the abuser is telling you, and it really breaks down your self-esteem and your confidence. You can think that you just have no self-worth, you're incapable of doing anything, you're incapable of making any change, you feel beat down. um it it's a very defeating feeling. And we see that a lot with our clients, where we have to remind them that no, you are capable of these things. That's why Daya is so important, because we try to empower our clients to believe that they can make those changes and unlearn all of the negative thoughts and all of the things that their abuser has said. Of course, you have a multitude of mental health issues like depression, anxiety. If there's a lot of physical abuse involved, you might have TBI, which is traumatic brain injury. And of course, sexual assault as well. So it's a very complicated, it's really hard to get out of it. And that's why like counseling is really important as well.
And I'm glad that's what you're.
And we don't talk about mental health and counseling in our community, or it's taboo, or even if you talk about it, you talk about the light stuff.
No, and then
like that. Oh, I was sad today, so I cried.
Course.
You're not actually going to talk about the things that are eating you.
Yeah, because it's a stigma to be talking about. And then if you're going for counseling, like people are just gonna look at you like you're crazy.
Or you're the crazy one. Like I think about Dear Zindagi, that movie, all the time. Dear Zindagi with Alia Bhatt.
Yes,
and that scene where she she literally says, I'm in counseling, I'm cuckoo, to the whole family. It's very powerful. But that's how a lot of that's how the younger generation feels a lot of the time, when they want to share with their families, but they're just not accepted.
Yes, and
Yeah.
because I guess that's the way their parents are raised,
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
like
It's
you were,
generational.
yeah, it's generational. Like you were saying for financial abuse, where the new wife might think it's okay to give the money to the in-laws, right? But that's because it's been instilled in her since she was little that
Yeah.
parents, like, you just respect them and you don't question them, and so forth and so on. So
Yeah.
it's like something that's just built, and then to undo all that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. What resources are available for individuals who are experiencing domestic violence?
So of course, if you've experienced physical or sexual violence and it's an emergency situation, you should call 911.
Okay.
Of course, that's the first thing you should do.
Yeah.
Daya, offers so many services like immigration, legal, housing, counseling. We try and help with almost anything that we can that's in our scope.
Yeah.
And there's a multitude of great organizations in the Houston area that have specific services based off of your ethnicity, whether it could be Hispanic, if you're
Yeah.
African American.
Yeah.
There are shelters. You can go, I think, on the mayor's. You said there's a mayor's
Yeah,
list that
there's
has a
a
huge list of comprehensive services that
Okay.
anyone can access.
Yeah, this Mary's list is a great resource because it has all the updated phone numbers. Although they we try to
Yeah.
keep
up.
everything as
Yeah.
updated as possible, but a lot of organizations either have stopped services for a little
Yeah.
while, or due to funding, they just don't
Yeah.
have the capacity. But the mayor's website is updated, I think, pretty often, are often enough to where phone numbers are updated and
Yeah.
active,
Yeah.
and they do a really great job at also just listing out in a few sentences like what this organization does for those that do call.
Yeah.
Also, anybody could call Daya, and we have a wonderful helpline advocate. She has created this great comprehensive list. So anybody can call Daya, and we will
Any
always give
ethnicity,
you,
you mean?
anyone in the city
Yeah.
can call Daya,
Yeah,
and
okay.
we can get you
Yeah.
referrals to the right organization.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
awesome. How can friends and family members support someone who is in an abusive relationship?
This is a very like multi-layered question, because I think there's no cookie cutter way of supporting anyone.
Yeah.
Just as there's no cutter way of experiencing domestic violence. Like you and I, like Mansi and I, we have very similar backgrounds and very similar, like, the way we've been raised.
Mhm.
But if she has experienced life in a completely different manner as I have,
Mhm.
you could be from the same background, have the same ethnicity, same type of parents, but you've technically had a complete different experience in this life, right?
Right.
And in the same way, a lot of survivors with the same background will experience violence in a different manner.
Okay.
And so the best thing to do when supporting a friend or a family member is really telling them that you believe them, because Mansi earlier mentioned how as soon as you start criticizing your friends or family members, they're going to become more reluctant to reveal anything to you.
Right.
So telling somebody that you believe them
Mhm.
can open the doors up, the floodgates, I would say,
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
entire story.
Yeah.
And then being aware of, the educational resources, for example, how we just talked about the different forms of abuse. Maybe your friend doesn't know that financial abuse it exists, right?
Yeah,
And so if
exactly.
you're aware of
Yeah.
it, you can print out something. I know our website has a lot of great information on there, but loveisrespect.com or .org, my apologies. Loveisrespect.org has really, really great resources on the different types of abuse, and they sort of list out things for this reason, that you can print it out
Mhm.
and you can give it to your friend
Oh, okay.
without it being like, oh, you are being abused,
Yeah.
you need to
Yeah.
do something.
Yes.
It'll be like a nice little article.
Yeah.
And then after the educational portions, just being aware of the resources. So like take a look at the mayor's comprehensive list of
Yeah.
organizations, and maybe if you're in a certain part of town, maybe one organization is closer to you than others are. So being aware of the resources around you so that
Mhm.
you can help somebody if they do come to you. But at the end of the day, just wholeheartedly being there for them, listening, like not offering mediation in any way as a solution to the
What do you
abuse.
mean by mediation?
Like, I know some religious leaders like to do this, faith leaders in Houston, where we actively try to educate them not to do this, but we've heard stories where this faith leader will bring in the abuser and the survivor and sit down and talk about what's happening.
So there's no professional, it's just the faith leader.
Right. And then the faith leader will use tactics to keep the couple together.
Yeah.
And say, do it for the children. You know, in our culture, in our religion, divorce isn't seen like, you know, like a proper thing.
Yeah.
And so not offering mediation at all, not bringing up the abuser, because you want to focus on the survivor while you're supporting them.
Right.
The abuser can leave out the window, right?
Right.
You want to say, how can I help you? And not being like, oh my God, I cannot believe they did this, this, and that to you, because that's taking the attention away from the survivor at the end of the day. So those are a few ways that you can support friends and family members that are in abusive situations. Really just being able to recognize what they're going through, helping them recognize, knowing how to respond, you know, saying things like, I believe you, and knowing how to refer. So those are called our 3 R's.
3 R's.
Yes.
Another thing I was just going to tag on to what you said. A lot of times in our community, it's expected that the woman needs to make the change or fix the situation. And remembering that the person that's doing something wrong is the abuser, the partner, not the survivor. So it's so important, like what you said, that you have to believe the survivor, but you need to be patient with her as well, and not judge her and not put the blame on her or make her feel like, oh, well, do this, have a baby, you know, fix the situation. It's equally
it's
his
your responsibility.
Exactly.
To do it.
It's the
and
real
men
responsibility.
Will do what they will do. That's okay.
Exactly.
You know,
but the real responsibility, the focus needs to be that the person doing something wrong, they're the one responsible.
Yes.
Yeah. And they need to be, you know, held accountable. But that
Yeah.
doesn't happen most of the time.
And that's so sad.
Yeah.
But that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. We're gonna take a quick break, and we'll be back after our break. To Chai Time on 103.5 FM. We're in conversation with Tisha Baby and Mansi Bakshi, and we're talking about domestic violence. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And so, are there any unique challenges faced by marginalized communities when it comes to domestic violence?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and that's why organizations like Daya even started, right? 27 years ago, our founders saw that domestic violence was such a unique issue within the South Asian community, and that other organizations, there were so many gaps that they didn't understand our culture, the religions that we practice, just the societal norms that we have. And so generally, yes, a lot of minority communities do have unique experiences of domestic violence due to the little cultural nuances, right? Like in South Asian culture, there's always, I love saying this and I hate it at the same time, where it's like, what will people say?
Yes.
Growing up, I don't know, I didn't do things because my parents would be like, what would people say? You know, thank God they've stopped saying that now. But there's that hush hush like culture. There are barriers like language barriers, where if you can't speak, if you can't tell your story in the language that you know best, there's obviously going to be a lot of misinterpretations of your story in general. Another barrier is immigration. A lot of survivors think that because they're not permanent, you know, status yet in the U.S., that they're not eligible to receive any, you know, of the services that we offer.
Right.
A few other things are just isolation in general. Our communities, marginalized communities, often, because we are immigrants and we're away from our family members, when we do come to the United States, we experience some form of isolation, right? Especially when you are being abused, your abuser probably isn't letting you go to, you know, social events. And so when you're isolated, you start to question yourself that, like, am I actually going through what I'm going through, or am I making this entire thing up, you know?
Yes.
So isolation is huge as well. And of course, the financial barrier, you're most of the time you're not coming here with enough funds to take you, to help you get a hotel for
Yeah.
2 3 months,
Mhm.
while you figure out something, and while you figure out a way to flee. So the financial barrier, because of either financial abuse or just coming here with limited funds, is a huge reason why folks do stay in abusive relationships.
Yeah.
So those are a few of the unique challenges, but overall, there's one thing actually I want to talk about this because I don't think it's talked about a lot. There is a lack of trust in mainstream systems. Um, by that I mean minority communities. When you read the news, when you watch something on social media, you see a person of color being harassed by a police officer,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
You see people dying in hospitals at a higher rate when they are coming from minority communities.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you see that,
Yeah.
you feel a level of discomfort
Mm-hmm.
seeking help from those people as well, right?
Right.
You're not going to go to the hospital and say, hey, I've been sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
Because what happened in the news 2 3
Yeah.
weeks ago, a woman of color died in the care
Yeah.
at a hospital.
Yeah.
And so that is a big challenge that not a lot of people talk about, but does exist for minority communities, is that because they have been targeted so much in the past by mainstream systems, that they don't feel comfortable even reaching out to them for help.
Yeah.
So if a woman is facing any type of violence, she's going to fear calling the police because
Yes.
a person with her skin tone was harassed.
Yes, definitely, and that's sad, but it does exist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, how can we break the cycle of domestic violence, especially when children are involved?
I think one of the main things is recognizing that abuse even exists in your relationship. We've talked about this a little bit earlier, but in our community, because of socially, and culturally how our community is, so much of the different nuances are it's so ingrained
Yeah.
that you don't even know, you can't differentiate whether is this a cultural thing or is this abuse.
Right.
And so the first step is even recognizing that, oh, I'm not being treated like any normal human being should be treated.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that, that can take years.
Yes.
You see a lot in our older generation. It's so ingrained that people still don't believe that it exists. And as daughters or as children, we can tell our moms that what is happening to you is not right. Or even in-law abuse is a big one. We'll focus on the partner, but like Tisha said, it's a family issue. Your in-laws or your mother-in-law may not be treating you with respect. Your sister-in-law, it's rampant in a way. It's hard to recognize when, again, culturally you're just being told this is normal.
Yeah.
Another big thing is just educating survivors about different forms of abuse. A little, like Tisha mentioned this before too. I see this a lot with clients, especially in that first, after a friend or family member connects them to Daya, and when we do our client, like our intake, like appointment, we have this like history of abuse checklist, and it's very detailed based off of, let's say, physical, sexual, spiritual, financial, all different forms. And there are specific examples of like, oh, have you experienced this? Or it's very detailed.
Yeah.
And you can actually see a client recognize how poorly they have been treated based off of that checklist. It yeah, it's sad sometimes.
And then one other thing that I always want to mention I love that today we're getting a unique experience of hearing it from like somebody who works directly with clients, but then from like a prevention place, right? Children are like sponges. Whatever you put out there, they're going to absorb it. Mm-hmm. So one thing that I always like to educate about is when children are involved in, any type of scenario, that healthy relationships need to be modeled to them, because they don't know morally and ethically what is correct and what is not, because if mom and dad are in an abusive relationship, that's their normal,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
But when you model healthy relationships to them, and if
Yes.
you have a unique advantage of being somebody else in their lives,
Yeah.
like, right, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and you can model that
Yeah.
healthy relationship and model that level of respect that they should be receiving. I don't remember the exact statistics on this. My brain can only hold so many. But it has been proven that children, even if they have grown up in a DV household,
Yeah.
but they have been taught healthy relationships by somebody else, that they are less likely to fall into that pattern of abuse.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, children that are never taught about healthy relationships often become survivors or perpetrators.
Yes.
So I wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that we also talked about
I'm
that.
glad you did. And then also another movie, I don't know if y'all have seen it, Rocky and Rani Ki Prem Kahani.
No, I
Heard
haven't
of
Like
it,
seen
from
yeah.
you need, like, you'll see it from the prevention point. I am so proud of media for doing that on such a big scale, because the issues like the in-laws abusing, like taking control of the son, and that just affecting. And then Ranveer Singh learns later that it's not right, and he stands up for his mom. And that happens so often, right? So I'm so like, we are talking about awareness, and I'm so happy that Bollywood is actually sending messages, because
Absolutely.
people listen when things like that are happening on big screen, and there are actually movies start standing up for it. It's just amazing. So.
And that's why, I mean, we look at Bollywood stars in that light, right? But
Yeah.
somebody looks up to each one of us in that same light as well, whether it's our children,
Yeah,
nephews,
Yeah,
young people
so
in our
nicely
lives. So when
put.
we
are role
speak,
models. for
right.
them, Yes.
And so when we speak up about these issues, they feel the way that we do, right? When
Yeah.
we're like, wow, Bollywood's talking about it. So
Yeah.
I am very proud of whoever's listening in that you are going to be this person for
For-
somebody.
Another thing I was just going to add on, um, in our community, we think that staying in the marriage is best for the children.
Mhm.
And the reality is that is completely not true.
Yeah.
And that's something I work with my clients to make them understand, that you think your child is not absorbing what's happening at home because you never argue in front of them.
Mhm.
Your kids pick up they pick up body language, they pick up tone, they understand exactly what's going on. And I've even had clients tell me that they've noticed that their children have started to behave and take specific actions that their abuser has in retaliation, to like towards other people. So that's, one thing we really need to talk about in our community is that sometimes divorce is the right option, or separation is the right option,
Yeah.
because it is actually better for your child to see both parents happy
Yes.
or healthy rather than
Unhappy to
yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, because there's such a big stigma, and I know, like, there are so many communities working for that, but divorce is such a big stigma in our community, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Can you please share success stories of survivors who have overcome domestic violence and rebuilt their lives?
So I have a couple. Of course, everything is strictly confidential. I'm not
Yes.
using names or anything.
Of course.
Some of y'all may have heard about one of our, clients that spoke at our gala that we had 2 weeks ago. His, to me, is like a great success story.
Yes.
But I also see that even every step of the process is a success, right? Even calling the helpline and acknowledging, oh, this exists in my life, that is a success. And so many of my clients, they have been working towards just rebuilding and living an independent life for 5 years, 10 years. It's a very long journey, and it's not the healing is like not a linear process at all. So like, I'll talk about him because I think, his is a very unique story. But there's another client of mine who I feel very passionately about, and she works so hard, and she has now chosen, she ended up getting a divorce from her abuser. She has 2 children. She was an immigrant. And after the divorce, he ended up it's a different situation. Normally, you know, we hope that the mom will get the kids, but in her situation, the father got the children because he earns more financially, and she pays him child support. And we really, you know, it pains her every day to know that her kids are not with her, but she works at a nonprofit just because she was so inspired by how Daya has helped her become empowered.
Right.
She now works in another nonprofit in Houston. She works, you know, with a different population. She's constantly having to deal with legal issues that come up, and she still has to meet her abuser. Of course, he's the father of her children, but at the same time, you see so much strength and power, and there's a will to fight. And I value that success story just as much as the other survivor who, you know, he struggled in terms, he ended up being in a very terrible marriage. There was sexual abuse, there was drug abuse, and it ended with like a physical altercation where the abuser tried to kill him, and of course police got involved. And he was referred to us, so we were able to help him with immigration. He's a student as well, so he was really struggling with trying to complete his classes with scholarship, making the right grades, but not even realizing that the timeline of how quickly everything happened to him, it was a lot for him to grasp, because he also lost a parent. Like, his father passed away. He was dealing with so many mental health things, and it made him really vulnerable for this partner to force himself into his life. He was financially abusive. The abuser even contacted his universities, you know, trying to tell the university that he's a person of not good moral standing. It was a very negative experience. And, you know, this client, he is South Asian and he's gay. And the partner even outed him to his parents. Or to his family. And so he was kind of ostracized from his community back home. His mom cut him off. He was completely alone, but, you know, we've tried to help him as much as we can. Now things are a lot better. He was able to get a protective order, where the abuser can't contact him for 5 years. He's working on getting a divorce. We've been able to help him apply for the right visa that would work for him. And he actually shared with me at the gala that once he graduates, he's been offered a job at Amazon. So he's going to move. So his story is like the classic happy story, but I also wanted to focus on the other survivors and the other clients of mine who are working so hard every day, and it's harder, you know. I don't know.
But that willingness, like, right?
But
to
it's
fight.
You see that with like
that has to like strength every day.
Every day you have to make an effort. I have another client who is a cancer patient, and I asked her, you know, how are you doing? Do you have any suicidal thoughts? And her response was, I have to stay alive for my child, despite knowing that she has cancer and could pass away. You see these small acts of strength every day, and that's, I think, what really keeps us going and keeps us motivated.
I'm a crier, so you might just
Sorry.
but it is like, it's so I guess inspiring to hear this, and then you realize that your problems are very minimal. You know, you do.
We
have
all go
problems
through a hard time, and we all have our own different struggles.
Exactly.
But
then when you hear this, it's to a different level, right? And that the steps they're taking just every single day. So that's amazing. What educational initiatives are in place to prevent domestic violence and promote healthy relationships?
Well, for this question, I want to give you ladies a shout out, the Chai Time ladies, because having us here every single month to be able to educate the community on domestic violence, sexual assault, and just healthy relationships in general is huge. For a platform like this, for Daya to come on and always, I know we talk about difficult conversations, but really at the end of the day, even if it helps one or two people out who are listening, that means the world to us. So round of applause for y'all. But otherwise, I will toot my horn a little bit at the. We've actually worked really hard to build a comprehensive prevention program in this past year and a half or two, and for healthy relationships in general. I've created a healthy relationships toolkit, which is my baby, and we talk about these topics with the younger population, right?
Right.
We aim to talk to high schoolers and college students because we really do think that prevention is better than intervention.
Right.
And so these educational initiatives like sort of discuss we always want to make sure people know what the red flags are, but we also want to encourage folks that there are healthy relationships and you should have the right to be in a healthy relationships. So it's really to educate people on what to do if, you see certain red flags, but how do you even grow in a relationship if you don't see those red flags, right?
Yes.
So that's the Daya and Chai time portion. But on I mentioned this website earlier, loveisrespect.org. Oh my gosh, that website has my whole heart. They have so many great just articles. I think you guys as parents should read them too because it tells you from each age group like what is expected of that age group and what issues are they maybe seeing in middle school, right?
Yeah.
Because in middle school, that's when body dysmorphia comes into place because boys and girls are making jokes about each other, right?
Yeah.
And how that ultimately can affect a child's future because if they develop that body dysmorphia later on in life, if they do see a red flag pop up where a partner is making fun of the way that they're looking, there are negative consequences, right? So that resource is so great for anyone who's listening and just wants to learn about where they are at in life or
So
where
what
their
is
children.
body because I've heard body shaming, but I haven't heard
Body dysmorphia comes honestly from body shaming as well. Body dysmorphia is when you see yourself in a different way than most people see you, right? Where you might feel bigger than you actually are, or you think you're too skinny, or you're too short, or you have, people just their idea of themselves is very skewed from reality. But that is their reality, right? We have to remember that. So a lot of these things that happen in childhood actually do affect the way people see themselves in relationships.
How does technology impact domestic violence, including cyberbullying and harassment?
Technology, although it is such a great tool and we can stay connected with the world, I know that I'm grateful that I can keep up with my family members that are around, wherever they are. But it also opens up the door for a lot of, I like to call them keyboard warriors because they sit behind a keyboard and they say things to you. So this could be friends or family or even strangers where a lot of time on social media, like if you are in an unhealthy relationship, the abuser will start making up lies about you so that it looks like you're the abuser when you're actually the survivor. So a lot of perpetrators use social media as a tool to either get revenge if a survivor has come forward and said that, hey, I'm being abused. So then the abuser creates these like fake scenarios and puts them out there for the world to see. Or it's used in a very different manner as well, like for revenge, not revenge, to make a survivor not leave the relationship. So in that scenario, an abuser can say, hey, I have intimate pictures of you, and if you leave me, I'm posting those online. And then technology also makes it way easier for an abuser to track a victim, right? Find my friends.
Stalking.
I know.
Stalking.
Yes, stalking.
I feel like technology, it's a great tool, but it's also when it can be used to manipulate somebody so easily. I mean, you have air tags and tile, but you can stalk somebody, you can, hack their social media, their pictures, you can I've seen abusers use technology to try to frame a client and get her in jail.
Oh my.
It it's
Yeah.
like a double-edged sword.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
And a lot of cyberbullying and harassment occurs in that middle school and high school age as well, where once again, a young person's idea of themselves gets very skewed by
Yeah.
what they're reading about themselves online and what, I mean, silly middle schoolers are saying about people.
Yeah.
So that's why it's really important, also, side note, that when you are on social media and you're scrolling through your timelines, I see what my friends are liking. I see what Monsi likes on Instagram all the time. But you have to be aware that, are you liking something that might affect another person, right?
Yeah.
Is there a meme about domestic violence or assault, and did you like it?
Yeah.
And if your friend sees that, your friend is going to know that you don't support them at the end of the day.
Right.
What you're reposting really matters, because I know if somebody that I know in my personal life was reposting things that I didn't believe in or something I was going
Yeah.
through, that would make me not want to once again seek their
Yeah.
help. Yeah.
Yeah. What are some common myths and misconceptions about domestic violence that need to be addressed?
I think the biggest one is that it's a women's issue and not a men's issue at all.
Mhm.
It's like we talked about the statistics earlier. 1 in 4 women, and I forgot, 1 in 10 men,
Yes.
and 1 in 4 women experience
Yeah.
some form of domestic violence. Okay, this is totally off topic. I was watching Love Is Blind yesterday, and there's and it's this season. It's based in Houston, and there's an
Oh.
episode of a guy where they're in the pods, and they're sharing and trying to get to know people, and he actually shared that the first time when he lost his virginity, it was actually rape.
Forced,
Yeah, it was
yeah.
forced. And like that's the first thing that just comes to my mind, because he even said that I told my friends that I lost it to this girl my junior year. Like, so the lie, this fake story he's been telling for his entire life, and finally he told this person the truth. That was the first thing that I was thinking the whole time, is that it happens to men all the time. We just don't our society just doesn't
Definitely.
let them feel like they can share their stories.
Because people, I'm so
no,
sorry.
go ahead.
People, if a woman is assaulted, people are like, "Oh my gosh, this is so bad."
Mhm.
But what we hear from male survivors is when they say that they were assaulted, the guy friends are like, "Bro, that's actually, you weren't assaulted. That's so cool. A
Yeah,
woman
like-
hit on you."
Mhm.
Yeah.
No,
No.
absolutely
sad.
not.
Yeah. No, and then another thing is just that we think that domestic violence or sexual assault exists more in like immigrant populations or amongst like people of color. That's completely not true. Domestic violence does not, it affects anybody from any socioeconomic background, any race or ethnicity. It really does affect everybody, and if it doesn't affect them directly, it affects a family member or a friend. Like, everybody is somehow related to this.
Yeah.
And we just need to have more conversations about it and try and reduce the stigma.
Yes, absolutely. And be there to support them instead of, just shoving it under the rug.
Yeah.
Can we go to 16?
Yeah. What can individuals do to support Domestic Violence Awareness Month and make a difference in their communities?
This is a great question, and I know we're like running,
Yeah, sure.
a little low on time, so I wanted to end with this. But there are a lot of great events happening in our community this month, and specifically this Thursday, we're having an interfaith event where a lot of faith leaders are getting together. Daya is one of the hosts, and we'll be talking about how faith leaders have such a huge role that they play in their specific communities. And so that's just one example, but there's going to be a vigil later on in the month to honor those that have lost their lives to domestic violence in Harris County. And so what I encourage everyone to do is, for the local organizations in your area, look up what events that people are hosting and try to show up to show solidarity for those survivors or somebody that you know in your own lives. And always, I like to say that we can't do this work if we don't have the community support. So if you can donate to an organization that does assist survivors, that is highly recommended because those donations go directly to our unrestricted funds,
Okay.
which unrestricted funds help us get those hotel rooms, help us call Ubers, help us provide food and shelter for those fleeing.
Yeah.
Although we have great grantors, but there's so many restrictions.
limits to funding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but really educate yourself at the end of the day to read up more on Domestic Violence Awareness Month and look at what resources exist for yourself and those around you.
Definitely. And thank you so much for y'all coming to the show every month and giving us such great information and creating so much awareness. I know we are making a difference out there. So thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners. We will see you next Monday, same time, and at our new station, 103.5 FM.